You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading. Guess I got bored.
Hello and welcome to TFM's local books and comics show for Star Trek, and I am just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and so excited to have with me, as he is pretty much every single time these days, which I'm so excited that that's the case. Casey Pettitt, how are you, Casey?
I am good. You know, I need an intro for myself, like Miss Drea Kaufman over on Owl Post. She'd always say, "Hello." I need a call sign or something to.
Howdy,
howdy, everybody.
Howdy, partner. Anyway, apparently we're watching too many John Wayne movies, but well, we are going to be a little southern today. We're going to be back with Enterprise. So, and this is a very trip-heavy book that we'll be talking about. It's Daedalus. It's the first book in that duology. So, before we get to anything else, though, just a huge thank you to everybody who's listened. We really appreciate it, and we hope that you have subscribed wherever you're listening, wherever you're getting your podcasts to. If it's something like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can help us out with a star rating or a review, and both of those things would be appreciated. It really helps people find the show. You can also find us on Twitter at Trek FM. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/Trek FM. We're on Instagram at Trek FM. You can find a listeners-only discussion group called the Babel Conference, where you can join listeners from all over the world and discuss the shows that we're doing here on the network. And if you want to, you can always go over to the website at Trek FM, and you can find a complete list of everything that we do here on the network, which is a plethora of podcasts. And of course, you can also go over to patreon.com/TrekFM and become part of the team, like our associate producers here, Casey Pettitt and Greg Rosier for the Literary Treks. We appreciate their support. And of course, we can't do this without listeners just like them supporting us each and every month. So become part of the team and make sure all of the podcasts keep coming to you. Patreon.com/TrekFM. So, Casey, we do have a little bit of news here in that the third issue of Adventures in the 32nd Century is out. Yes. And of course, everybody knows I don't watch Discovery, but I wanted to interview you a little bit about this issue and see what you had thought of it, and if is the stock rising for the since this is the third issue, or is it starting to decline? How are you feeling about the series?
I would actually say that this issue is fairly well on par with the others. It's doing the same thing that the other ones have done, and I think that they're going to do with all of them is focus on one particular character. And now with three of them, we're seeing that we've got three very different stories here, and I think it's like I said, on par. The animation, the illustrations, the drawing, the artistry in this is kind of unique to this story, which is nice, since, I guess, to get into the comic a little bit, it focuses on a young Kayla Detmer, who we all know is the pilot on Discovery. And this is really, whether it's a flashback or kind of, it seems maybe even kind of like a hallucination or a dream of adult Kayla when she's in sickbay. But the art in this issue is
she on spores? Is that why she's okay?
Yeah. Because at the end she's actually like waking up in sickbay. But so it's essentially like a dream sequence, but the art in it is really cool because it's kind of a more cartoon or anime style, I guess, or something that looks like it would appeal to, if this was an animated Star Trek show, the animation would really fit, I think, and it helps kind of tell the story. So it was, and actually, once we get back into the quote unquote real world of her on Discovery, the art gets a little bit more traditional, like we're used to seeing in the comics.
Okay.
So
excellent. So it sounds like you said this is pretty on par with the other two. Do you think the rating would kind of be around the same, around a 3, or is this higher for you? What do you think?
I think I'd actually give this one a 4 out of 5, just because it's a fun, whimsical story of young Kayla just pretending to be a Starfleet captain, discovering new worlds and new life forms. An orca version of King Shark kind of shows up at one point for DC fans out there. But yeah, I think it's just really fun. And, I think with all the alternate covers that we have too, this one has some really interesting ones. A friend of the network and probably a friend of the show, Aaron Harvey, does some alternate covers. So I think, I would just give this 4 out of 5. I would even probably go as far as to say 4.5 out of 5. This is definitely my favorite of the 3 so far.
Nice.
Just given the whimsical nature of it, and just kind of, who of us didn't pretend to be a Starfleet captain in our young days?
This is very true. I mean, maybe we still do,
maybe.
But who knows? Well, that's great, though. I'm glad that you have been enjoying the comic, that it's continued to be consistent, which is always great when you are reading a comic series, and so hopefully that'll continue on throughout with the rest of the issues. But we are back in the Enterprise time period, which I'm so excited. So I don't know. Let's see if we can hit Warp 5. What do you say, Casey?
Let's do it.
Well, I first very interested, Casey, is being back here with the Enterprise series. And I know you've been making your way through all of the Star Trek books that have ever been written. And so for you, have you read a lot of the Enterprise books so far?
I think actually I've read all of them up till this point. I had this will be my first, or this was my first time reading this one, but and it's been a long time since I've read any of them, so it was actually really fun to. I mean, I've read some of the newer the Rise of the Federation.
Rise of the Federation, yes, yeah.
I've read some of those ones, but to get back to Enterprise during, I think this takes place like right at the end of season 2 was, I don't know, really fun because the characters are pretty solid at that point, and just kind of fun to be back in that era again.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I don't think I have read any of the Enterprise books actually that weren't post-relaunch. And so it's interesting for me to be back in this time period to see as they are trying to fit in stories, obviously, during the series, which is always an interesting thing. I mean, especially when you go back to any of the series and you're reading like TNG or Deep Space Nine or any of those, because there's not as much that you feel like the series can do. But, this book, I think, has a lot to it. And, like we mentioned there at the end of the news, this book really is very Trip heavy, which for me was fantastic. He's one of my absolute favorite characters here with Enterprise. But we really put him through the ringer as a character, I thought, in this story. And so first, how did you like his characterization, and what did you think of the story for him here, as he is really left almost alone to deal with the situation that he and Hoshi end up finding themselves in?
Yeah, and actually, just to kind of start off, I feel like I love the use of Trip here. I think he was the perfect character for the story. I mean, it was obvious that the story was written with Trip in mind, but having Hoshi there didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because she literally was in sickbay the entire book.
Yeah.
And she kind of showed up from time to time for him to check on her. But, you know, having this reminds me a little bit of that episode Unexpected, where he meets with, and in fact, I think it's even referenced in this book, where he meets
it is, yeah.
like Ceruleans or something like that. So in that light, this just felt, like I said, like a perfect Trip story, and his being so far into the series, like this takes place, I think it's like with it, like between the last couple episodes of season 2. So like on screen, his character is very well formed at that point. And I really feel that from the book, like, his mannerisms, like the little, you know, Trip-isms that he's got, like all his little colloquialisms that he keeps having to explain. And having him interact, I actually kept forgetting that these aliens were so close to, or so similar to humans. But even more like that kind of helps the story, and kind of a little bit of the love story makes sense for him. And he's, again, the perfect character to have kind of those Kirk moments, I guess, of, you know, meeting the woman of the week and falling in love. So I, you know, as a Trip story, this is definitely, I feel like a really well-written one.
Yes. You know, I think you're absolutely right in the sense that this series, that this book was specifically, you could tell that the story is really a Trip-centered story from the beginning, and very good use of the character, I think, like you said, 100%. I completely agree with you in the sense that it felt strange that, you know, Hoshi is kind of along for the ride and basically in a coma the whole time. It seems like just because they really do want Trip here on his own trying to figure things out, which I thought what was great about the use of Trip here was the fact that he, in his mind, is thinking back to previous missions and lessons that he has learned, actually. And his whole goal here is actually to try and not repeat the mistakes in the past. And that's one of the things that I thought was great about this, is because he's trying very hard to do things differently, to be a character and a person that learns from his previous experiences, the things that he did well and the things that he can improve. And that's something that I thought, you know, especially with these characters, you know, in Enterprise, their whole lives, you know, and the whole series was really about them learning and growing, almost more so than any of the other series, just because they had so much room to grow, because everything they were experiencing was completely brand new. And I really appreciated that David Stern, the author, really put, it seems like, a lot of thought into the decisions that Trip was going to wrestle with here, and how they connected with previous missions, and how he either might make some of the same choices, or he might try and make different choices. And I thought that was really well done.
Yeah, and especially kind of the main crux of the story being that he didn't want to get involved in the internal conflict, or the conflict between these two races, especially since one of them was pre-warp.
Yes.
And then the other one really only had anything approximating warp drive because of this kind of happenstance that this old professor of Trips got transported, 14 years ago to, and was captured by these people and helped them create this, what is it? The cascading ion drive. I think the SID, LCID.
Yes.
And
or as I like to call it, the Star Trek TIE Fighter.
Yes, there you go. And, and we actually, and we made good use of the sphere ship, or the cell ship, that they captured from the Suliban, which was really cool to see that. I'd actually forgotten that they had that at any point. the whole time, Trip had agreed to help repair, like do some repairs and even make some of these aliens' systems more efficient on their ships. But I did like the struggle that he had. It seemed like a very good precursor, I guess, to the Prime Directive. And, I think he mentions at some point that T'Pol keeps telling them, they got to be careful not to interfere. And it seems like you said, that he's really thinking on past missions and his current relationships on Enterprise, to think of how to deal with the situation. And kind of like in the last book that we read with Sulu and Chekhov, learning from Kirk and trying to deal with situations like kind of the what would Kirk do. And I almost feel like Trip was kind of doing that this time. Like, what would Archer do? And what would, even in some cases, what would T'Pol tell us to be doing here? And I think nothing about that I felt the pacing was right in that part of the story, as far as like he didn't just jump right in and be like, well, I shouldn't get involved, but you know what? Okay. Like we were kind of the cause of this anyway, or, dragging out to where at the end of the book, we're still not even sure either. I think it was paced very well through, like, for this story.
Yeah. The thing that I really liked that you pulled out there was the way in which we see him having to wrestle with basically this first contact situation and a Prime Directive type of situation, even though, they don't have the Prime Directive yet. It's definitely one of those things, like, how do I interact with the species, and what should I do and what shouldn't I do in light of where they are technologically. And what was interesting is that this reminded me a lot of the second episode, or the first episode of Strange New Worlds, where we're inadvertently responsible for having given these people technology that puts them on a level that they shouldn't be at yet. And this ties in specifically, this point of the story ties in specifically with the name of the book, Daedalus, and the cascading ion engine that Trip's professor and mentor, and a project that he was working on alongside of the other project that was happening, which is the Warp 5 engine. These two ideas were competing for which one was going to be the engine that Starfleet was going to use. And because of what happens to the Daedalus project, which they think it blows up, they obviously don't go with that engine. They go with the Warp 5 engine. What's fascinating is that the reason that they aren't actually dead is because they create an anomaly and end up on this side of space and get captured by this warlord, and he steals the information for the Warp 5 engine, from their database, and then, of course, has warp drive. And that connects back to the beginning of the story, where the Enterprise is going to explore this anomaly that they've never seen before. So it's just, he did a really good job, I felt like, Stern, of crafting the narrative here so that each of the revelations begins to connect back with different things that he's already been setting up, so that by the time you get to the end of the story, like, things make sense in the sense of where we are in the story and why we are. And we're obviously left on a cliffhanger, but I felt like everything fit together pretty well. And I wasn't having a lot of like lingering, like, wait, what kind of questions. It felt really good, actually.
Yeah. And it felt a little like, kind of like looking back on the book, it felt a little contrived that the cell ship just happened to have the same ion drive technology that they were trying to develop with Daedalus. And then he just happened to be thinking of his professor, and then he just happened to like declassify some information for this particular ensign that had discovered the ion drive on the cell ship. Maybe, like, there was kind of a lot of fortunate events, but it was easy to forgive.
A series of fortunate events.
A series of fortunate events, exactly. And that's kind of a common trope, I guess, in Star Trek, that especially in Star Trek books. I mean, it gave us something for later in the book when we found out that the professor was actually alive, because if that was when we found it out, we wouldn't care at that point. But since we got that story and that knowledge at the beginning of the book, it worked out. And it was kind of a nice explanation with the cell ship, because it's so small that, like, how could it possibly even have warp drive? It must have something else in order to be able to travel faster than light. So, and maybe that's just kind of the logical alternative to warp that different species use. And so I actually appreciated that. And I guess I'm saying I didn't get that hung up on it. I thought I would as the book went on. I thought I would get hung up on it, but I was like, it's not so bad.
I think you're absolutely right in calling out, and it's the thing that happens pretty much any time in storytelling, really, when we think about it, is that there is this series of fortunate events that leads most of the plot, if it's done well, to all fit together to make sense. And there was a point in the book where I was wondering, okay, so what is this Daedalus stuff going to have to do with it? And I actually, in my mind, was thinking, and I meant to message you, and I didn't, so I could see if I was right. But I had very clearly in my mind thought, okay, the Warlord is going to be connected to the Daedalus project somehow. And then it turns out he is, in the sense that he's the one who is responsible for finding the Daedalus and imprisoning the crew members, specifically the professor. Most of the rest are dead. One of them he's made his wife, which that's a whole other part of the story. And so I was really glad that everything finally did connect, but I think you're right in the sense that there's a part of it that you're like, okay, maybe that's a little bit much, but I'm willing to let it go just because I'm finding the storyline interesting enough. And one of those interesting parts is the fact that Duvall, who is a character that knew Jonathan Archer, that knew A.G. Robinson, was one of the top pilots and people in Starfleet, turns out to be the wife of this warlord. And we still don't have an answer as to what is going on in that part of the story, but that was a really interesting mystery to set up for the second part of this story. And I honestly have no idea where that part is going. And I'm, is it that they have joined the Warlord because, if you don't, I'll kill everybody, or, is it something like that? Or is it that they've legitimately fallen in with this character and have kind of turned their back on everything that we thought that they were, that Trip thought that they were, that Archer thought that they were, that Robinson thought that they were, that Starfleet thought that they were. That to me, just like I'm chomping at the bit now to actually get to book 2 so I can figure out what in the world's going on with this story.
Well, and so that was one of those things that kind of came out of the blue, but even the professor was kind of like, you think a person, and I've kind of got the same questions as you do on that, and I do wonder, has she really gone to the dark side, or did she see this as an opportunity to, one, stay alive, but two, try to save as many people as she could, as you said, and is she going to be a pivotal part in defeating this warlord in the second book? I hope that there's an explanation for it, just because otherwise it seems so... I was going to say non-human, but at the same time, it's a very human thing to do what you need to do to survive. And for some people, that might be what it was. But I would like to hope, especially since she was in those, the early days of Starfleet and the different faster than light projects that they had going on. I'm hopeful that she is using it as an opportunity rather than as an opportunity to save lives rather than just to save herself, because we've had those characters in the past in Starfleet that, we got the Maquis or whatever, like the Maquis were at least trying to do something good, I guess. But, there's even, Captain or Commodore Decker in the Doomsday Machine who kind of just went crazy. But I guess the only other thing that I can think of is, does she have something to do with the alternate timeline that they kind of introduced in the final pages of the book? That when they went through the anomaly, did a different version of her come out to where she was more amenable to hooking up with this warlord. So I don't know. It was kind of one of those things, like to find out that there were any other survivors, and that one of them's the captain who is now in cahoots, it seems like, with the warlord. It's a mystery for sure.
One of the things, though, that I'm wondering is that part of the story here is the question of what will you do to survive, because we have this faction that's fighting against the warlord, and the questions about what they'll do to try and regain their planet and regain their system is a big question throughout the entire book. And there's so many things that they aren't willing to do, which is good. And so it does really make me wonder if that's a question then that, by setting up Duvall, seemingly switching sides, will that be something that has to do with that theme, which I think would be great. Because, again, it's a really important thing, because it's also one that even Trip himself is having to deal with the situation that he's in. What's he willing to do here to try and survive? Not only survive, but also hopefully, be able to rescue his friends and the rest of the crew of the Enterprise. And so, I think all of that is where that could all fit together if it's done right in the second book. So,
and I could actually see, knowing Archer and his stories in Enterprise and the ladies' man that he tended to be from time to time, I could actually see if they got captured. Well, we know they got captured. In fact, the Enterprise is being put into that warlord's fleet. I'm wondering, now that I think about it, if Archer gets in contact with her, and if she has gone bad, if she broke bad, and if he'll talk her back to help them, or again, if that's where her true colors will be revealed, that she is true Starfleet or whatever, and will help Archer, without any, extra convincing.
Yeah, I mean, it's all really, I think, interesting thoughts of where they can go, which is fantastic, and it's like, it's good for them to have, that much story left to be able to dive into a book too. So that's awesome. I gotta ask you about the fact that, Trip does get himself into a romance here with a married woman, with who is the wife of the leader of the planet that was taken over. And the reason that he's not quite all there is because he was tortured by this warlord. And it has basically left him less than who he was. in the sense that he can barely remember what he's doing. He has trouble remembering the past at all, sometimes even, remembering himself or where he is or any of those things. And so he's been functionally gone for her for a very long time. And so how did you feel about this story? Because obviously it's not something new for Trip to kind of get into a relationship with somebody, but this one seemed a little bit different.
Yeah, and part of the reason, the part of the way that it wasn't different was just that she was kind of coming on to him. They were developing a mutual interest in each other, kind of like he did in that episode where he got knocked up, and he had met her husband, unbeknownst to him, earlier in the book, and had found out that this guy had essentially been lobotomized, but it was kind of I kept picturing, what's the guy's name from, was it Sloth from the Goonies? Maybe not as deformed, but like kind of just, mentally, just wasn't all there, because he was essentially lobotomized. And especially once he finds out that she's married, he's a perfect Southern gentleman. He backs off, and she is trying to tell him she feels okay with it if they were to pursue something, even though like part of his reasoning is like, as soon as we're done here, I'm going back to Enterprise, assuming we save everybody, and we'll never see each other again. So I know she's married and I'm not going to be around. What's the point in pursuing this? And it's another one of those places where the struggles that he felt inside, as he was going through this, were so real, and also I feel like kind of true to his character, that kind of the whole time, like, I wasn't sure whether to root for them to get together or, praise him for, being the gentleman and kind of saying, I know you say that you're okay with this, but I'm not sure I'm okay with it. Even if your husband was okay with it, I'm still not sure that I'm okay with it. And it's kind of one of those great Star Trek things of, what would you do if you were in that situation where you were, getting to know somebody and finding this connection, only to find out later that they're married, but their partner is in a coma for the rest of their life, or they're, I don't know, something. And so it's just kind of a nice moral quandary, I guess, for him to explore amongst all of the other things that he is dealing with in this story.
Yeah, I think what is really interesting about the whole thing is, this relationship is a choice that he makes knowing who she is. He gets signals crossed and he kisses her, and then he is told that, yes, that she is married. And then he makes the choice, and they do together to, get into this intimate relationship. And so I'm really fascinated to see where this is going to go for Trip. And because it can't really end well.
Yeah.
And so is this just going to be one more mistake that he's made, or, will this be something else? And I'm hoping that it's something else, that it's not just, obviously it's a mistake because she's married, and that's unquestionable. But I'm really hoping that this isn't something that we feel like, oh, well, we've seen that before with Trip, and we've seen them already kind of do that storyline, and so therefore we're not getting anything new. I would really love for this to be something new for the character and the lesson that he gets from it.
Yeah, because I feel like they can't really just kill her, because I feel like that would be almost too traumatic for him to then, go into the next episode. Yep. And, if we're, in our head canon, making this, canon. And then, we watch whatever episode comes after this, and he's just our good old boy Trip again. And, like it has to have lasting consequences, something that would lead to whatever his character does in the show, but not so damaging to him that his later, we don't want a big red reset button that everyone talks about with Voyager, at the end of this story with him, to where it makes sense that he's completely forgotten about her or something. Yeah, I agree. He needs something to learn from, even if they break up, I suppose, amicably. I hope that there's a reasoning behind it more than just, well, I'm headed off to Enterprise. That was nice knowing you.
Yep. 100%.
That wouldn't be that satisfying.
The real big thing is the revelation at the end, I felt like, of the book, which is that we're in an alternate universe. And it doesn't feel like it's the mirror universe yet, or are we there? I don't know. And so that's something I'm really fascinated to find out, is that the Daedalus' creation of this anomaly had actually led them to a different universe. And so, to me, the question really is this the mirror universe, or is this another type of universe? Which I don't, I have no clue, because it feels a little early for them to do the mirror universe, but, and that would seem weird then in light of In a Mirror Darkly, and so...
Well, and, unless they do something like they did in Discovery, where they just classify all knowledge of, this universe, what I'm thinking would work best is, because, I feel like that kind of came out of the blue, and that was kind of one of those parts of this story where I was like, did you throw that in here just to have a cool cliffhanger? Because I don't really feel like it was needed, because they were preparing essentially for war, really. I mean, like, they, after all of Trip's struggles throughout this book, he's really decided that he is part of this crew. He has been welcomed and accepted by them because he's helped them so much, short of building them a working warp drive, which he is flat refusing to do, and just says that I can't do that with what I've got here anyway. So throwing in this alternate universe came out of left field. I feel like I would doubt that it's the mirror universe, because, like you said, it doesn't seem like it would fit with anything else they did. I wouldn't put it past them, because we hadn't gotten to those, like when this book was written, those episodes hadn't happened yet. The other thing that I was wondering is, maybe we are actually in the Prime universe, but these people, like the anomaly brought everyone else, these races and their war to our universe. Because I know we're in kind of a slightly unexplored region of space. In fact, I want to say that this was a system that they were headed to, that the Vulcans had they noted that there were systems there, but hadn't charted them or anything like that. So, which enabled us to have this story with these new aliens. But I don't know, like, this is just another reason, though, why, as much as I feel like we didn't need this alternate timeline aspect of the story, it's just more reason that I'm excited to get into the next book and find out what is the deal with this. Yep. Especially because the cover of the book, if you look at the cover of Daedalus, it's the wing. And then on the next book, Daedalus' Children, it's a wing that's like broken in half and on fire or whatever. So a lot of intriguing things coming up with that, I think.
Yeah, I think, that it's a nice tease. And it's one of those things where it's like, if it's done right, it could really pay off in that second book, which is what I'm hoping will be the case.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, I think much like Left-Handed Destiny, this is a series where it's predicated on how the story actually wraps up as to whether or not this book goes higher or lower in my estimation, which is sometimes difficult. That, you know, you can't really just judge this book completely on its own. But I mean, you know, in many ways there are episodes like that. I would say, like, in any of the 3-part arcs you got in season 4, it's like they go together. You know, I'm not really judging one outside of the 3. So this really kind of feels like the same thing in that. So I'm not going to discount or knock this book for doing that. And I feel like this book has given us enough mysteries then going into the second book to legitimize feeling like, okay, I need that second book, you know, rather than, oh, well, we just tacked on all the stuff, you know, and you could have really just wrapped this up in one. So that's a really good plus for this book as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, having all of, like, and I said earlier, like, the pacing was just very good. I don't feel like anything was rushed or drawn out. The fact that they were leading up to this big battle, as I got closer to the end of the book, I realized, okay, this is going to be a cliffhanger into, like, it's not like we just have a sequel book coming after this. Like, this is gonna kind of have a to be continued on it, which, I completely agree that it makes it a little tougher to judge this book without knowing how the story ends. But yeah, I mean, because, like, the story is legitimately not done. It's not like we had a story that kind of wrapped up and then there were some threads hanging up. Like, no, the whole thing is up in there. We don't have conclusions on anything yet. And that actually kind of makes it more fun. And because the book was good enough, you know, I'm excited for the next one. There have been books in the past where it's like, you read the first book, or, you know, you're like, I'm not. Or even when you watch a new TV series, you know, you watch the first couple episodes and you're like, I am not into this at all. Like, I can't continue 100%. Just to see where it goes. I hate it when people tell me, oh, you just got to get through the first, you know, half of the book and then the second half is really good. Well, I don't want to get through the first half of the book. Like, I don't have to, like, slog through it just to see how it ends, you know, like, and so, like, this one, you know, like, it was a pretty quick read and, did what it was supposed to do, I think. Yeah,
I agree. Well, I mean, what would you end up rating Daedalus?
So I landed at 3.5 cascading ion engines, drives, LCIDs. You know, I had a hard time, you know, trying to think if it was, you know, a 4 or higher, just because of some of the writing as easy as it was to read, like, some of the writing was a little, I don't know how to say it, like, not great. Like, I mean, even, like, the use of Hoshi was a big one for me. Like, every time she popped up, I'm like, why is she here? Like, I would assume that it's going to be something that plays in the next book, but I really wish he would have given her something more to do and stopped calling her Ensign Hoshi throughout the whole book. It was like, it was almost like he didn't know her name, but other than that, like, I mean, there was actually one quote that I actually highlighted because it was so good. It was, I think it was the doctor was thanking Trip for all the work he was doing, and he was being super humble and was like, don't mention, you know, like, it's fine. It's what I do for a living or whatever. And she said that, everyone on board Eclipse has lost a loved one to this war. So please, if others do offer their thanks, try to think of what they might be feeling before you answer. And I just thought it was like one other good part of this book that, I mean, because I think I was going to land on a 3, but then brought it up to a 3.5 because, like, things like this in the book, this had, like, great Star Trek lessons in it, like this lesson of humility or grace or something. Like, you know, when a person says thank you, you know, a proper response is you're welcome, not like, don't mention it. It was nothing, whatever. Like, don't downplay their thanks. You know, it was just, I thought, really cool lesson in that. And there were those kind of scattered throughout the book. So as I'm talking about it now, I'm like, oh shoot, should I have done that 4? But I'm going to stick with a 3.5 though. So how about you? Where were you at?
Yeah. I I went with a 3 for this one, and part of that is because, it really is dependent on how the next book goes, and I reserve the right to raise the rating for this one if that book does land well. And so, but I mean, I enjoyed all of the moral quandaries that Trip find himself in. I enjoyed the fact that, this book is really about him and him trying to grow and become a better version of himself, and again, sometimes failing in that, which I think is interesting to have characters who still have these type of flaws that we're able to follow. And so I'm very excited to see where we go next. So yeah, this book definitely hit that Enterprise spot, and now I'm ready for the next.
It is so good to be back in the Enterprise era and, reading some of these older books again. And I know we've got some other old ones in the future. So I'm looking forward to our docket of books in the future. And, like you have mentioned before, and I was saying too, like the second one of this one and wherever else we may go from there.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited for us to get to the second book in this series, and this one did enough to make me want to read the next, and I think that's awesome. And so I can't wait to see what happens. And like you, I'm enjoying being here with the crew of the Annex 01, and I'm excited because we're about to dive back into Warp 5, and we're going to be in Season 2, which is this time period. So really excited to be in that as well. But Casey, if anybody wants to catch up with you, of course, and see what else you've got going on outside of Literary Treks, where would they find you?
You can find me on Goodreads, Letterboxd, Twitter, and Instagram at Knitting Trekkie. And I'm also lurking around in the Babel Conference from time to time on Facebook. And you can also find me on another podcast called Mickey's Marvels, where we discuss anything and everything under the Disney umbrella. We just talked about Moon Knight recently too, so check it out.
Nice. Yeah, we're about to do that on the 602 Club, so that'll be super exciting to listen to that. So you can find me, of course, all over the network with so many different shows. Pretty much the only show that I have been on these days is Interface, so 602 Club, Saddle Up, Warp 5, and Artificial Tango, all of those. Check those out, I hope. You can also find me over on the Nerd Party Network. There are 2 shows there. One is called Owl Post. Casey mentioned I did with Drea Kaufman, where he talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time, and Aggressive Negotiations, a Star Wars podcast there with John Mills. But, as always, thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, live long
and read on.
What do you call that, light reading? To each his own, number one.